Okay. So welcome. Thank you for joining me today. Today's program is Entering Farm Transactions on QuickBooks and PC Mars. My name is Florencia Colella, and I'm a farm business management educator with Michigan State University. My pronouns are she or they, and I am multiracial. So if there's anything you want to express during the webinar, including questions, you may type it in the chat box. You're also able to unmute yourself and show your video if you prefer to do it that way, but please stay muted when you're not speaking. I may have to mute you if there's background noise. If there are any questions I'm unable to answer live, I'll send the answers in a follow-up email that you'll receive after the meeting. I have enabled automatic live transcription for our deaf or hard of hearing participants. This automatically adds text to the bottom of the video with a real-time automatic transcription. You can take a moment now to turn it on or off. If you're joining from a computer, you can do that by going to the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And on cell phones, settings are just a bit different, but you should be able to find them by going to your Zoom options. I would also like to acknowledge that Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Ardabwa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereignty of Michigan's 12 federally recognized Indian nations, for historic Indigenous communities in Michigan, for Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and for those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, and we will work to hold Michigan State University more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. MSU Extension programs are open to everyone. We are required to ensure civil rights policy adherence to report program participants' race and gender data to the United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA. Providing this information as a participant is voluntary. I would really appreciate it, though, if you could take a moment to fill out this form, and you can do that now. So I'm copying the link in the chat. This helps me show the reach of the work that I do. Individual responses are not shared with the USDA and are separate from registration and mailing lists. If you came to the last session or any of the previous sessions and completed it, thank you very much. But since this is a different session, I would really appreciate it if you could do it again. Finally, I would like to recognize that as adults trying to learn while riding the demands from farming and life in general, I hope we give each other as much grace and support as we can. So without further ado, let's get started with our program. And we are going to kick us off with an overview of QuickBooks and some of its related software. But first, what are some of the advantages of QuickBooks? Their website will tell you that it's easy to use. Lots of farmers or ranchers I've worked with would argue otherwise. But once you learn some of the basic commands, it's a relatively user-friendly program. Many accountants prefer it because the double entry feature allows you to create a good balance sheet, although it does have some shortcomings for inventory tracking, like we will see in a minute. It has both cash and accrual-based systems, so you can have accounts payable and accounts receivable accounts, and it lets you create things like invoices and billing statements. It also has lots of report options, and finally, it has a reconciliation feature to streamline that monthly task. And what are some of the disadvantages? Accounting for certain asset inventories does not always work well for agriculture. You can make it work if you resell items, but it does not work very well when you're dealing with raised crops or livestock. And we've been talking about this in previous sessions. It just does not understand how things can appear out of thin air. So you'll probably end up having to keep your inventory outside of QuickBooks. And then since it has both cash and accrual accounting systems all at one, it has this switching feature between cash and accrual-based reports, and that transition just does not work really well because of the fundamental differences between cash and accrual and how they apply to farming activities. Some producers ask themselves, why not use Quicken instead? If you're wondering if it's worth your time and effort to switch over to QuickBooks, the answer is really just depends just depends on your type of business. Quicken is focused more on cash flow, so it's hard to produce a balance sheet, and it's not accrual based, so you don't have accounts payable and receivable. It has a payroll feature, but it's not as good as QuickBooks. It lacks some opportunities for sorting and summarizing information over that offered by QuickBooks. And when you're starting out, setting up QuickBooks is really just as easy as setting up Quicken. And it's probably going to benefit you more in the long term. QuickBooks has more, I guess what I'm trying to say is if you are on Quicken now and you want to switch over to QuickBooks, the conversation is easy either way. So the other option that you may be wondering about is QuickBooks Online. It also has some pros and cons. The pros are that it can be accessed from any location on multiple devices, and it's easy to share information with partners, accountants, or anybody else who you may want to share your books with. It has automatic updates and data backup and infinite storage. In general, service-based businesses work pretty well with QuickBooks Online. For example, if you want to be able to pull your QuickBooks while you're in the middle of a field working with a customer, create an invoice and email it to them directly, QuickBooks Online will work pretty well for you. It does also have some disadvantages. It lacks some of the desktop features. You have reduced control over the data, and it requires reliable, fast internet access. It has a payroll feature too, but the desktop version works a lot better for that. And another big disadvantage is that if you have multiple companies, you will be charged multiple subscriptions. What I mean by this is I could go out today and buy QuickBooks Desktop Pro for around $200. I'm not sure how up to date that number is though at this point, but I can use that for multiple companies and keep it for multiple years. In contrast, QuickBooks Online charges a monthly subscription of around $35 a month for the Plus version, which has more features and it's more comparable to the desktop version. So you're going to be spending around $400 just for 1 year, and that will be for one company. So if you have separate companies for crops versus cattle, for example, that's going to cost you 2 QuickBooks Online subscriptions, so it can get more expensive really fast. So in this section, we pondered some of the advantages and disadvantages of QuickBooks Desktop and some alternative softwares that have historically been part of the same package, QuickBooks Online and Quicken. Next, we are going to enter a few transactions on QuickBooks. So here is the QuickBooks Desktop homepage. It's kind of like a mind map. For the purposes of this section, we're going to assume that your QuickBooks is already set up. If you need help setting up your QuickBooks, though, you can ask your local MSU Farm Business Management Extension educator for resources to do that. And you should consider joining the MSU Telfarm program that provides support year-round, but also for setting up your QuickBooks for the first time if you are trying to do that. So let's move into sample entry number 1. That is a simple entry, writing a check to pay a bill from the local co-op store. This entry could be made using the check register. So if you click there, you'll see all your latest entries. The first column is the date, and here is everything for 2020, and we're assuming we are in 2021 now, and this is going to be a 2021 entry. There is also the type of transaction, account, a memo, and amount for each transaction. Although we could use this screen, we're not going to, because it's recommended that farmers print their checks using QuickBooks directly. So for that, we are going to go back to the home screen and we will click on Write Check. And we will enter the check number, date, amount, and select the bank account, vendor, and invoice number if we have one. And then we will enter the account or accounts at the bottom. For this particular check, our first line item is fertilizer. So we pick the fertilizer account and enter the amount, detail, and then we pick a class, which is QuickBooks' way of keeping track of enterprises. So the fertilizer is for the row crop enterprise, same with the seed that I purchased, and I will assign a gate that I bought to the livestock enterprise. Then we can print the check right here. And once I've done that, we'll click Save and New to enter our second check. This will be a payment for a piece of farm equipment. Okay, and I'm reading Joe's comment in the chat. QuickBooks Desktop is now an annual fee or monthly fee basis. The pricing model is now an annual fee. After 2020, it is no longer owned for year after year. So I guess that's that makes it more like QuickBooks Online. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I had heard that, but I forgot to update the slides. So I'm going to look into that for next time. I appreciate the comment, Joe. Okay, where were we? So paying for a piece of equipment. The procedure is exactly the same. Enter the check number, date, amount, select the bank account, vendor, invoice number if we have one, account, memo. The only difference is in the class. We don't normally use classes for balance sheet items or like assets. We use the class methods primarily for profit and loss items. So I'm going to skip that, and QuickBooks will prompt me to confirm if I'm not using a class for this purchase. So I'll say yes to that, and then just save and new. So let's move on to our next example. Entering the purchase of a piece of farm equipment with a cash down payment, equipment trade-in, and financing the balance. So there's going to be a lot going on this transaction. As always, there is the option of the check register, but we will use the write check option for this example instead again. And so let's first focus on the bottom section. The total amount for the tractor is $35,000. And so that is the purchase of used New Holland TE 475 tractor assigned to the machinery and equipment account. And once again, I'm not going to use the class function because this is a balance sheet item. So we only use that for profit and loss items again. So I will leave that column blank. Then we are going to enter the loan from the ag lender, which is going to be assigned to a liability account, hence the negative sign. Note that the account that I assigned this to is a specific liability account for this loan that I had previously created. It is recommended that you don't have just one account for all loans, but that you have one individual account for each specific loan. There's always time to lump them together at a later time, but at this stage, it's much better to be able to see each loan separately. So the dollar amount for the loan is $13,950. And note that I have put in the negative sign there. It doesn't do it automatically. Then I write the memo, 3-year note for New Holland TE 475, tractor loan number 123. Since this is a liability account, not an income or expense account, I'll leave the class column blank again. Okay. There we go. Next, we're going to take care of the trade-in of the old tractor. That's in the machinery and equipment account. And since I got rid of it, I put a negative sign on there. For the amount, this particular tractor had an original purchase of $26,000, and I took that information from my old records. I enter some notes, leave the class column blank again because this is an asset, and you're ready to skip over to the next line. The next line is the accumulated depreciation. This is the depreciation taken on this tractor since I got it until the end of the previous year, in this case, 2020, for a total of $22,300. Since depreciation is an expense, to remove this tractor's depreciation from my books, I have to reverse that. So I'm going to make this a positive number. This is called depreciation recapture. The last item we have to pick up on this is the gain on the old tractor sale. That goes to an asset account called machinery sales. In this particular example, the old tractor was taken in as a trade-in for an $18,000 value. Doing the original $26,000 value plus the $22,300 in depreciation recapture plus the $18,000 I got for the trade-in gives me a gain of $14,300. So we're going to enter that amount with a negative sign a note, and we are done. That way we get the total that we actually paid. So the amount you had to write a check for at the time of the transaction is $3,550. That's the down payment of 10% of the new tractor price. And it matches the balance of all of the numbers entered at the bottom. QuickBooks won't let you save until this is all balanced. And that concludes this particular entry. So this was a complicated one, but we did it. All right. The next one is much simpler. It's a farmer that gets an operating loan from the bank and records the deposit. As usual, we could enter this into the check register, or we could use the record deposits feature. We're going to do it here in record deposits. So first, we're going to select the bank account the money flowed into, the date, and we'll leave a brief memo. Then we're going to move on to the bottom section, and we're going to leave the first column blank because in the second one, we'll use an account name that includes the name of the organization we're getting the loan from. So in this example, we had an operating loan from Ag Lender already set up. So I picked that one. Remember that you should have an account name such that you can tell this loan apart from other ones. Then I entered a longer memo, 12-month operating loan for the 2021 crop year. Since this was an electronic funds transfer from the bank, I'll just write EFT in the fourth column. And lastly, I'll enter the amount. Since this is a liability, we don't bother to put a class on it. Then save and close. Now, let's just see how it looks on the check register. This is the cash register for the bank checking account. There's today's date, deposit, the account, the short memo, and the amount in the deposits column. So this is what it looks like if you're using the check register view to either make or view your entries. Any income that does not require inventory tracking, such as loans, crop insurance, patronage dividends, or government payments, can be recorded using this method. Next, we'll record a farm checking debit card transaction for Sunday lunch with a family. This is a family living expense. In this example, the farmer is using farm funds, which are business funds, to pay for a personal non-farm business expense. Non-farm business expense. So we're going to use the write a check feature again, even though this is not a check. And we're going to enter today's date at the top. We're going to enter deb for debit card transaction, the amount, the vendor name, or at least a description like local shop or local restaurant, the account, so family living, and a memo. Since this is a non-farm expense, we'll leave the class column empty and we'll save and close. Another option for entering this transaction would be to post a withdrawal from an equity or net worth account, like a draw. The next transaction we'll look at is a purchase of farm supplies using a credit card. For this transaction, we will use the Enter Credit Card Charges screen on the QuickBooks homepage. So first, you need to make sure you have the right credit card account at the top, especially if you have more than one. Then enter the vendor name, date, reference number if you have one, amount, and memo. Then pick out an account, in this case, livestock expenses, or you could use an account such as feed, and then pick out a class to the far right, in this case, livestock, because this is cattle feed. Then save and close. Now, a note about credit card transactions. Instead of entering them yourself, you could have QuickBooks sync your transactions straight from the bank. You can also make rules to categorize them automatically. There's like an approval process where you check your transactions and make sure they are coming into your books the way you want them to. So that's nice. And it's a feature that Quicken offers also, and even Mint, which is the free alternative to Quicken. If you aren't sure you want to use QuickBooks yet, and you use a lot of credit card, or you have a lot of credit card transactions, that might be something to look into. Okay. So next, we will write a check to make a quarterly payment on the tractor loan that was discussed in an earlier entry. So we go to write a check. The payment amount to the local ag lender is $1,743.75. We will make sure our bank account at the top is the right one. And then we'll enter the name of the ag lender, check number, date, amount, memo, and then we'll pick the liability account and assign the principal amount to it. In this example, the principal amount is $1,575.33, and the rest is interest. We know this because we're looking at the loan statement from the bank. Since this is a balance sheet item, we're not going to charge this to a particular class account, but we will for the interest portion. In this case, assigning it to the row crop class, as that's what we use the tractor for. We talked before about having a separate account for each individual loan. And you will notice here that we do not just have an individual account for the loan itself, but also for the interest portion. See how they both have the New Holland T475 name in them? The loan itself is a liability account, so a balance sheet account, and the interest account is an expense account. So they are two separate accounts. So let's make a stop here and see what's the procedure for entering new accounts. The easiest way to add a new account is to go to the top of the options in the drop-down accounts menu, and it says add new. I know you can't see it very well, but it says add new. Then it asks what type of account it is. In this case, let's suppose we're adding the interest account. So we will pick expense and continue. And then we'll give it a name. In this case, a good name would be interest for New Holland T475 loan. A nice thing we can do here is set up a general interest account and make all individual loan interest accounts sub-accounts of this broader one. You can also assign this new account a number to make your entries faster. So at the top right of the screen, in this case, for example, if the general interest account is 033 and this is my fifth loan, I can number this account 033-005. And then I can just save and close and use this. Now let's move on to the next entry, recording farm crop sales. This will be a two-step process used to record any sales where you would like to track quantities or keep an inventory. The first step is to create a sales receipt, and we'll just walk through it very quickly. In this example, we're going to sell corn, so we'll pick corn from the item dropdown. Then we'll enter a description, quantity, class, row crop in this example, and the amount. The rate per bushel is automatically calculated by the software. And we'll also make sure we have the date and buyer at the top. Then we save and close. Once you've done this, you'll notice that there's a little 1 on the record deposits icon. So we're going to click on this. And it will show the deposit we want to enter. We're just going to make sure our payment is selected and press OK. And it will take us to the deposit funds screen. So here we're going to make sure we have the right account and the date at the top, enter a couple memos, both at the top and bottom, pick a class, row crop in this case, and save and close. Okay, now before we move on to our next transaction, let's see what to do if we didn't have the item in our list already. When we go to create a sales receipt, it gives us the option to add a new item again. We're going to type in the name of the crop, add description, and very important, the account at the bottom right. Then click OK, and you're done. So let's move on to sample entry number 9 now, transferring money from savings into farm checking. The farmer needs to add money to the farm operations checking account from their general farm savings account. This is a simple transfer, but it is important to account for it in order to have reconciled accounts with the bank statement at the end of the month. Since this is a very simple entry, we're going to use the check register this time. But we could use the write checks feature if we wanted. So we go to the check register option and we will be able to select which bank account we will be working with. So let's pick the checking account. And now at the top, we can see we're working on the checking account, and we have added at the bottom a deposit into the checking account from the savings account for an amount of $5,000. So it's a debit or a deposit into the checking account. Or alternative, we could have gone to the savings account and recorded a credit or a reduction to that account. Either way. So we record it and we are done. Okay, I'm looking at a message from Jade on the previous transaction. And yeah, let me just, I'm going to do the summary for this section, and then I'll answer your question. So in the section, we learned how to enter a few typical transactions in QuickBooks. First, paying a bill from the local co-op store, paying for a piece of equipment. Third, paying for a piece of equipment with a loan, a down payment, and a trade-in. Fourth, recording a loan coming in. Fifth, recording family living expenses. Sixth, farm purchase with farm credit card. Seventh, farm loan payment, recording crop sales, and moving money from savings into checking. Before we move on to the next section then, which is QuickBooks Reports, Jade, I'm going to try to answer your question. And if Corey's hearing, she may be able to add to this. But the reason we create a sales receipt instead of just entering the check in the register is that we want to track quantities for crop sales. That's the only reason. It's important to be able to calculate your cost of production at the end of the year, that you know how many bushels or how many pounds of product you sold, depending on your type of farm. So that's why we do it that way. Hopefully that's clear enough. Okay, so like I said, we'll now look at a few QuickBooks reports. And so this is a larger view of the QuickBooks home screen. At the top there is the option for reports. Once you open that, you'll see a lot of different options. For now, we'll focus on the company and financial option highlighted in green. And the first option in the menu to the right is the standard profit and loss statement. You will need this report for a lot of different things. For example, for tax planning, you'll have to look at the standard profit and loss statement for the first 3 quarters. That's through September or through October. To see your income and expenses so far, then you'll have to forecast your your income and expenses for the rest of the year, October, November, December, or November and December. Looking at last year's income and expenses may also help with that. That's for tax planning. So once you click into that report, you'll be able to show the columns by quarter, by month, by total, which is the first option at the top of the drop-down menu. That would show a cleaner report with just one number per account. Or another interesting one is showing columns by class towards the bottom of the drop-down list. Having it broken down by class can make it easier for you to forecast income and expenses, like we were saying. And it can also help you see which enterprises are making money and which are not. Here's where you could pick specific dates depending on what you want to see. And in this menu to the left, there's more options for dates. So you can quickly go and see what last year was like, for example. Another report that you will want to look at regularly is the profit and loss detail report. This report shows each transaction, and it will help you pinpoint any errors in your record-keeping entries. Another thing that, although it's not a report, it would be useful for you to know is how to generate a 1099. Recall that Form 1099 has to be filled for each person to whom you paid at least $600 in rent, custom work, or other types of work, such as a veterinarian, attorney, or accountant. As you can see, there are lots and lots of payments to a farm worker at this farm. If this is contract labor, then by opening the 1099 wizard within the vendors menu, you can generate the 1099 to send them in January. Lastly, we're going to look at the balance sheet. First of all, a reminder that if your account totals in the balance sheet are not matching with your bank statements, there is something wrong. So please stay on top of your reconciliation so that those account totals are a true reflection of your bank account totals. And then remember that looking at the profit and loss statement is great, but it does not give you a true representation of farm profit, as it does not take into account inventory changes. And we've talked about this in previous sessions. So we use the balance sheet to help us not just see our financial position at a point in time, but also to make those inventory adjustments to reach a true estimation of profitability. But year-end inventory adjustments take into consideration a lot of things like crops and feed in storage, growing crops, livestock, prepaid expenses, receivables and payables, and accrued interest. Most farmers do not keep track of all of those things in QuickBooks. It just isn't worth the time investment for them to keep track of all of that during the year. They do it once a year, and that's enough for them. And the other thing with the balance sheet in QuickBooks is that for machinery, equipment, vehicles, buildings, improvements, and land, you will only have cost values recorded, so what you paid for them. And while this is great to look at the QuickBooks balance sheet, you'll basically end up having to use an Excel or Word document or work with your local extension educator to have a really complete one done every year. So that's with the balance sheet in QuickBooks. And so summarizing, we looked at the most important reports that QuickBooks offers: the profit and loss report, the 1099, and the balance sheet. Oops. Next, we'll do an overview of PCMARS. PCMARS is a piece of 80s looking software specifically designed for farmers based in Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, and South Dakota. So it's designed with taxes of those different states in mind. The company that develops PCMARS is based in Iowa. So PCMARS can be installed on a cash single entry or an accrual double entry basis. The accrual setup gives you extra account codes for equity accounts, and there are additional reports for balance sheets and accrual income statement and other accrual basis reports. Farmers usually use the cash option because it's simpler to use and understand. And then they just use a different tool or an extension agent or accountant to do more complex year-end analysis. So it is really nice to have that flexibility to go real basic or real complex depending on your needs. Another pro is that it is really affordable. It costs just $75 a year with an extra $45 to track accounts payable if you want that, and $40 extra to track accounts receivable and create invoices. This is per company though, so if you have more than one company, then you have to take that into account. Note that this is not enterprises, it is companies. Enterprising is included in the basic package. PCMARS includes basic payroll capabilities in the basic package, and it has an option of more advanced payroll capabilities for $30 extra. It includes detailed tax reports. And a very important point is that it just is very simple and easy to learn. Farmers love it for this reason. A couple other differences with QuickBooks is that PCMARS creates a new set of books each year, whereas in QuickBooks, books are continuous. So changes made to last year's books in PCMARS won't affect this year's books unless you choose the option to carry over. Whereas in QuickBooks, whenever you make changes to last year's books, you will get changes to this year's books. In theory, finances are continuous, but sometimes we need to fix errors. So having that flexibility in PCMARS to reset the books every year is really nice. PCMARS is a small company, and that in and of itself could be a reason to support them. But another reason is that it has much better support from the software provider. Sometimes CPAs prefer QuickBooks and therefore recommend it. But if you are going to rely on your CPA for support, that may cost you. So you really need to think whether that will work for you. Finally, although we said that most farmers don't rely on their accounting software to create a complete balance sheet because it will always be missing something, PCMARS does have space to enter both cost and market values in the balance sheet. So it's nice to have a place to put that information until it's time to create the complete report. If you remember, when we were discussing QuickBooks, we said that you can only record cost values in QuickBooks. Okay, so in this section, we looked at some general characteristics of PCMARS in terms of cost, user-friendliness, and capabilities. Now we're going to look at how to enter a few typical farm transactions on PCMARS, and we'll go through the same types of transactions we did with QuickBooks. So this is the PCMARS homepage. It's like a blank canvas. For the purposes of today, we're going to assume that your PCMARS is already set up. Remember that if you need help setting up your books in PCMARS, you can ask your local MSU Farm Business Management Extension educator for resources to do that, and consider joining the MSU Telefarm program that provides support year-round and also for setting up your books for the first time. So our first sample entry is paying a bill. To do this, we will go to the right check icon, the first one there, and it will open a check-like screen. There are several entries into this screen, and the Enter or Tab keys can take us through each of them. First, or you can also use your mouse, obviously. So first, we'll select the bank account at the top, then the check number. PCMARS will automatically enter the next consecutive number from the last one, but you can override that and enter one of your own. Automatic withdrawals can be entered as AW, for example, or left blank. On Pay to the Order, we will select one of our vendors from the drop-down list. You can also start entering the first few letters of the vendor name to bring it up, or just write down the name of the vendor if it isn't already on your list. The address will autofill if you had entered it when you set up the vendor, but if you don't have the vendor set up, then you can add that information here. Okay, now we need to enter the date of the transaction, which will automatically be set to the date on your computer. If the date of the check is different, you can overwrite it. And you can also click on the drop-down box to bring up a monthly calendar. By the way, PCMARS has the option of writing the check right from this screen by clicking on the print button to the right, or just pressing F9. Finally, we'll enter the amount, and if we want any additional information printed on the check, we'll write a memo. Now we'll focus on the details section. Here we'll enter the account code, enterprise, amount per item, description, profit center, and units or weight if needed. I guess going back to Jade's question before, one reason we think PCMARS is more farmer friendly than QuickBooks is that you can enter your units and weight right here instead of doing like a two-step process. And I think I'm going to talk more about that later. But anyway, where was I? So the details section, we enter the account code, enterprise, amount per item, description, profit center, and units or weight. An example would be if you were buying seed corn, the code would be 409 for corn seed, and the enterprise would be CRM. You can put additional information as to the brand of seed corn under your description, and then units. You can put how many bags you purchased, for example. If you also purchased seed beans at the same time, you would continue on to a next line when you hit your Enter or Tab key, or you can click the Insert Row button to the right. You can continue splitting this check to as many entries as you want to come up with. Of course, the total amount on the check will have to match with the addition of all of those rows. And so that's it. You just click Save or press F10 and you're done. PCMARS is Windows only program. That's a question from Ron and Margie in the chat. I don't know. I don't know. Are you using Linux? Mac. Oh, okay. So if you are a Mac user, then yes. If you're a Linux user or something different, I don't know. Okay, Mac. Yeah, you can have PCMARS on your Mac. Okay, our next sample entry is paying for a piece of equipment. For this, PCMARS has what they called wizards. These wizards prompt users for all the extra information needed for entering capital purchases and reduce the chances of errors. To use the capital purchase wizard, I'll go to transactions, special transactions, capital purchase wizard. Then I'll get this dialog box asking whether the purchase was made only by cash using a check, by financing using a loan, or by a combination of both cash and loan financing. So I'll pick the first option. And I guess backing up a little bit, I talked about this wizard thing. And if you remember when we reviewed QuickBooks, we did enter everything line by line on our regular write check screen. Yeah, that's a lot more manual. Like, you have to understand how things work a lot better to not make mistakes there. Whereas I think that PCMARS makes it a little easier for you, like I said before, to not make mistakes by having this wizard. Okay, so I'll just show you. So this window appears and it lets you select the date of the transaction, then say no to the question of whether there were any assets traded, because there weren't in this example. Then I'll select the bank account, enter the check number and the amount, select the vendor, and the address should populate, and then a short memo to go on the check. And then at the bottom, I'll select the machinery and equipment account code. I'll use a general enterprise in this case, enter the dollar amount and description, and click on Make Check or press F10. PCMARS will enter the wizard information into a check screen now that I have to save. I can print it also from here. And that's how you enter capital purchases. Our next sample transaction is paying for a piece of equipment with a loan, a down payment, and a trade-in. So in this screen, we'll select the third option. And in this one, we'll enter the date, then we'll say yes to the question of whether there was a trade-in, personal property for the type of asset traded in, one for the number of items traded in, no to the question of whether an old loan was rolled into the new one. Then we select the bank account from the drop-down list, enter the check number, the cash down payment amount, and then we select the name of the creditor from the drop-down menu and pick a liability account code. In this case, I'll select 256 equipment loan. Then I'll enter the amount for the loan, and I'll move on to the dealer or vendor information. I'll pick my vendor from the drop-down list, in this case, New Holland, and the address will autofill. Then I'll enter a memo. Here in the bottom section, we'll enter some information about the new tractor that we are buying. An account number, machinery, and equipment in this case. I'll enter general for the enterprise because I use this tractor for everything in this farm, an amount, and a description. In the next section, the yellow part, I'll enter some information about the tractor I traded in. I'll pick machinery and equipment again for the code, general for the enterprise, $30,000 because that's the amount they took my old tractor for, and a description. Then I'll go ahead and click Make Check or press the F10 key. And PCMARS will show me the check screen that I can print if I want, and then I'll save it and I'm done. Our next sample transaction is recording a loan coming in. So this time from the main screen, we will click on the second icon in this section here, the yellow one. This is for entering deposits. And then we'll use a similar process to enter a deposit slip. We will first select the bank account, the deposit number, which will automatically be the next consecutive number, but we can change it if you want to any number, or AD for automatic deposits, for example. Or we could also leave it blank if we wanted. Then we'll enter the date, and that will automatically be set to the date on the computer, but we can change it if we want to. And finally, we'll enter the amount and a memo. In the detail section below, I'll pick a vendor from the vendor menu. And here, note that my liability vendors, which are the financing organizations that I do business with, have a star L next to their name. In this case, my lender is C. Wilson Land, and this loan is for a land purchase. You may notice that some vendors have a star A next to them, though. These are asset vendors. These are people that I do business with where I lend them money. Sometimes this is the case with employees, or I may have a land contract. So these go with asset accounts, and that's why they have a star A in the name. Okay, but once I've picked my liability vendor, in this case, I'll pick an account code. In this case, it will be a liability account called land loan. Then I'll add an enterprise, the amount, a description, and I'm ready to click save or press F10. And that's how you enter deposits, specifically loan deposits. Our next sample entry is recording family living expenses. To do this, we'll go to the write check feature. We'll enter the bank account we used to pay for the expense, a check number or a code to help us know how we made the payment. In this case, we write debit because this was a refund actually. Then we enter the vendor, date, and amount. The address should have populated automatically, but it seems we don't have this vendor on file, which is fine because we aren't sending a check anyway. So we can just enter the information here or not. And we can enter a memo if we want. At the bottom, I'll enter an account code, in this case, family living, an enterprise, which we'll just leave as general, and the amount. By the way, if we just click on the amount title of this column, PCMARS will copy the number from the top on here, so we don't have to enter it again. In this case, it shows a negative number because we are in theory writing a check, but we are recording money coming in, so we have to enter it as a negative number to keep things straight. Alternatively, we could have used the deposit screen, and in that case, we would have entered it as a positive number. Either way works. So we're now ready to save or press F10, and we are done entering this family living expense, or it's actually a refund. Okay, our next sample transaction is a farm purchase with a farm credit card. In the QuickBooks chapter, we discussed that QuickBooks has the ability to synchronize with your bank account, automatically importing everything. You can set this up clicking on the Setup Bank Feed for an account option in the Bank Feeds menu on QuickBooks. PCMARS does not have this feature, but it does have an Excel import feature that will enable you to upload into the program any spreadsheet statements that you get from your creditors' online portals. To be fair, QuickBooks has an import feature too. So it has both an instant sync and an import feature, whereas PCMARS has only the import feature. So that's a point for QuickBooks. But anyway, we'll now show you how to enter farm credit card transactions on PCMARS the old school way. For that, you go to the credit transaction option, the fourth one from this section at the top. And this screen will appear, which is similar to the check entry screen, except that the money is coming from a loan vendor rather than a bank. Loan vendors can be any revolving credit providers, such as credit cards. So I'll select my creditor at the top. In this case, GSFC Operating. Then I will pick a liability code in this case, and in most cases, these types of transactions will be short-term loans. I'll also note that this is an expense. If it was in, for example, a refund, I could choose that. Then I'll just leave the number PCMARS assigns to the transaction automatically, pick my vendor, date, and amount, and enter a memo. At the bottom, I'll pick my transaction code or account. In this case, Farm Fuel and Oil. And the nice thing here is that I can set up that every purchase from every oil goes to that account. So PCMARS actually categorized this transaction automatically, as if I was entering it myself. Then I enter general for the enterprise, as this will be used across the farm. The amount, which PCMARS brings from the top, if I click on the column title where it says amount, and a description. Once I've done this, I can click on the Save button or press F10. However, that's not the end for this transaction. I still need to enter the credit card bill payment when I get the statement at the end of the month. So I'll enter all of my credit card transactions using the method I just described. And at the end of the month, I'll use the check feature to pay my credit card bill. And that's like any other checking expense. Pick a bank account, number, a vendor, or in this case, my creditor, the date, amount, a memo. At the bottom, pick an account code, which in this case, PCMARs can again be configured to know that every check that I enter for this vendor is a short-term loan payment. And enterprise, amount, and description, and save. Okay, our next sample transaction is a farm loan payment. We're going to enter this as a check. So first option from this block here. Or I also have the option to go to transactions at the top and then checks expense. So as always, I'll pick a bank account, check number, the name of my creditor, the address if it doesn't auto-populate, the date, amount, and a short memo if needed. And then at the bottom, I'll enter two lines, one for the principal and one for the interest. I'm getting this information from the bank statement. So for the principal, the account is a liability account called land loan, and I'm assigning that to the general farm enterprise with $12,561.47 out of the $19,382.83 that corresponds to principal, and $6,821.36 are interest. So I pick the interest expense account, assign this to the general farm enterprise again, and that's it. I can save or press F10, and that's how you enter loan payments. Our next sample transaction is recording crop sales. We do this by going to the Enter Deposit screen, which is our second option from this block. Or we can also access it by going to the Transactions Deposits Income option from the top menu bar. As usual, we enter the account number that the deposit went into, a deposit number, or we just leave the one PCMARS assigns by default, a date, the amount, and a memo. On the bottom section, I entered the vendor name, that is the name of the person or organization I sold my crop to, the account code, in this case, corn sales old, and I'm using this nomenclature to differentiate this year's corn sales from previous year's corn sales. Then I enter the corn enterprise code, the amount, a description, and very importantly, the number of bushels of corn this transaction corresponds to. Once I've entered this information, I'm ready to save or press F10. And again, going back to Jade's question earlier, it's easier, I think, than QuickBooks. Okay. So our next sample transaction is moving money from savings into checking accounts. For this, we're going to go to the transactions menu item at the top, and we'll choose the bank account transfers option. There isn't an option to open this screen from this block here. Many farmers just use either the check feature or the deposit entry feature to enter bank transfers. While that will turn out just fine in the accounting, it's not the recommended method. The bank account transfer screen lets you pick a from account and add to account, and automatically brings up the balances, which can be a useful feature. Then it's just entering a number or leaving the one assigned by default, a date, the amount, and actually when you use this screen, the memo is entered automatically for you as bank account transfer, which is nice. Then just save or press F10. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this section here. The little glasses there will bring up a list of all the transactions entered, which you can sort by date, vendor, code, etc., and then make changes to a transaction if you need to. The red check mark brings up the reconciliation screen. And this section here has a list of all accounts, a list of all vendors, a list of all bank accounts, a list of your enterprises, and a list of your employees there. I'm not going to show you each of these screens today, but just know that they are there. And this way you can go and add or make changes to your accounts, vendors, banks, enterprises, or employees if you need to. You can also access these screens by going to the setup menu option at the top there. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this section in which we learned how to enter a bill payment, an equipment purchase with cash, an equipment purchase with a loan, a down payment and a trade-in, a loan deposit, family living expenses, a credit card farm purchase, a loan payment, crop sales, and transfers between bank accounts on PCMARS. Okay, and before going into our next section, which is PCMARS reports, I'm going to try to address a question by Ron and Margie. Since we don't live in any of the states you mentioned, we live in Alaska. Is there still support available for the PCMARS program? Also, is it set up so that it is limited to those states with pre-canned info or more broadly usable? I think the best answer for that, Ron, Margie, would be to contact PCMARS and ask. I hope, I wish I could tell you yes, but I don't know. I know that the Telefarm program with MSU Extension will probably not be available for you because it's focused on Michigan farmers. But you may be able to just use PCMARS, given that, assuming that you're okay with some of those tax features not applying to you. So, but yeah, I would ask. Yeah. Okay. All right. Reports that can be exported from PCMARS. So again, this is the PCMARS home screen. And at the top there is the option for reports. PCMARS has a lot of report options, but we'll focus on just a few. The first one I want to show you is the check register report. This report looks similar to the traditional check register. It starts with the beginning balance for the month and bank account in question, and then shows all the checks and deposits entered in order by date. It adds or subtracts transactions from this balance up to the last entry, after which it shows an ending balance and inflow and outflow totals. It is an awesome tool for reconciliation. This report includes other information like the period, check number, whether or not the transaction is cleared, the transaction type, if it was an expense or a deposit, vendor, description, account codes, and amounts or dollars in and out. To export this report, after selecting the check register option from that drop-down menu I showed you, you'll get this window and you'll have to select the bank account and date range. Then pick view by date, show transaction allocation detail, and show cleared and uncleared checks. If you prefer, you can change the view by choice to sort the list by entry, order, or check number. You can preview the report to see if you will get what you want, or just go ahead and print it. The next report I want to show you is the detail report. This one includes all bank accounts transactions in one report. So it's nice to print after you've confirmed your check register is correct for all of your accounts. I like to keep a monthly copy of this report as a support document. It includes a lot of detail: account code, enterprise, check number, date, transaction type, bank account, vendor, description, units, so forth. I like that I can separate inflows and outflows, and it will show me totals. For example, here I can see that my expenses in machinery and equipment were $3,300, and my income from sales was $1,000. This report is helpful to find errors in account classification. It lets me scan through the items within each account. So if the vendor or description don't match up with my group type or account, then I can go back and correct any errors. It will also include liabilities split between incoming and outgoing dollars and grouped by loan account. And in the income and expense section, I can make it include beginning and ending code balances to see how my current period income and expenses compare with the year-to-date values. To get this report, I have to pick the Detail Report Selected Items option from this drop-down menu. And in the report settings screen, I'll have to sort by vendor, but other options are date, check number, entry order, or enterprise. The type of transaction can be expenses, deposits, bank transfers, credit, journal entries, and paychecks. Bank lets you see only one or certain specific bank accounts if you wish. And you can also select by numbers, dates, vendor, accounts codes, description, enterprise, and amount. I usually leave everything just blank. Leaving fields blank just tells PCMARS to include everything to date. If you want something specific, just fill in one or two of these fields, and that will narrow down the report to include only what you want. From the bottom checkboxes, you can have PCMARS calculate a price per unit on account code items where you have entered quantities. I usually have it separate the dollars in from the dollars out in the assets and liability sections by marking the split asset and liability inflow outflow checkbox. And I also like seeing group totals and beginning and ending account balances. But if you don't want that, you can just uncheck those boxes to the right there. Okay. Next, we're going to look at the year-to-date cash summary report. It's kind of like a profit and loss statement, except that, like we've discussed, it's just cash-based, so it's not a great representation of true profitability. But this report gives you a concise look at where your money is coming from and where it is going. It shows total dollar amounts for each account code for the month and to date. Assets and liabilities can be split into inflows or sales or outflows or purchases. Then it shows all income accounts and all expense accounts. And at the end, it subtracts expenses from income and gives you a cash net. It will also include non-farm transactions if you've entered those. To get this report, I first click on the year-to-date cash summary option on the drop-down menu, and then either accept or change the suggested month at the top. I usually leave the enterprise option blank to get all of the enterprises, and I like to see non-farm detail, inflow and outflow totals for assets and liabilities, and group totals. I usually do not want to see the budget because I usually don't have it in there, and I also choose to suppress lines with zero balances. Budgets and PCMARS can be created in the cash flow module. We're not going to look at that for now, but just know that the option is there. Next, we're going to look at the year-to-date cash flow format report. This report shows the actual cash flow for the farm. The months are broken down by account code with the total for each account code on the far right. There is a column for each month. This looks similar to a cash flow projection, but it shows reality. It is super useful for building the budget for the next year. You can restrict it to your different enterprises to see their comparative performance if you want. To get this report, we select the year-to-date cash flow format option in the drop-down list, and then select our enterprise if we want a specific one. And I usually leave the quarterly and budget options unchecked, although it sometimes is useful to see this with a column for each quarter. And I usually choose to include non-farm totals and exclude lines with zero balances. Since we just mentioned that the year-to-date cash flow report has an enterprise option, let me show you another nice PCMARS report for seeing enterprise information. We get there by going to Reports, Enterprise Reports, and Multiple Enterprise Report in the drop-down list. Then I'll include either a month or a range of months and select with a mouse which enterprises to include. I usually pick them all. You can rearrange the order of the enterprise columns by dragging and rearranging the order on this screen. Then you can choose to see the transaction detail list, but I much prefer to see columns. This is what it looks like. It is like the year-to-date cash summary report, but broken down by enterprise with farm net totals at the bottom and including asset, liability, income, and expense accounts. All right, now let's move on to the balance sheet or net worth statement. The net worth statement is not on the reports menu, but on the inventory menu. It is the bottom choice, but because in theory, I don't know if you saw that, but I just clicked on something and now I'm seeing something weird on my screen. Okay, now it's gone. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I was saying that the theory is that this is the bottom choice because you'll export this after you have completed the above inventory items in that menu. Most farmers I've worked with will not use this and instead create the balance sheet either in Excel or with an extension agent with the financial analysis software that I've talked about in other sessions. But anyway, if you pick that option, you'll get this screen where you'll get to choose to display either cost basis or market values. Basis means to use the cost of the item, less depreciation taken, plus depreciable improvements made. This reflects the long-term effects of the earning power on your business. And market value means to use the amount that you or someone else believe that the item could be sold or purchased for today. This is harder to prove and is somewhat more subjective. It does not necessarily reflect earning power, but may look better in terms of potential collateral for loans. And so this prints a one-page report in a balance sheet format, assets on the left and liabilities on the right. In order to fit this on one page, the items are summarized into general groups: current assets and liabilities, non-current assets and liabilities, and so forth. Then it calculates an apparent net worth that includes your personal assets and liabilities if you have entered them. And finally, it calculates a few ratios. Using a financial analysis software or even Excel, you can calculate a lot more ratios than these. But anyway, the net worth statement option in PCMARS has the potential to print a full balance sheet, provided that you invest the time in filling in all the inventory information first. Okay, so since producers will usually not create their balance sheet in PCMARS, but instead go to Excel or to an agent, accountant, educator, or consultant for that, they usually need to hand them some information. Sometimes this can be handwritten information. Sometimes it can be printed and sometimes entered in a spreadsheet or a combination of those. When putting together this information, they usually go and take inventory, which is great for the things that we have in inventory in a farm. But one thing accounting records should be able to provide with certainty is bank account and loan balances. This information should be reconciled with the bank statements and should include all transactions. For this, PCMARS offers the Bank and Loan Balance Report. This report finds all bank, financial asset, and loan accounts and displays beginning and ending balances, and it includes separate columns for money in versus money out. To get this report, we go to the Reports drop-down menu and pick the Bank and Loan Balance Report option. Then pick a month and select Split Asset and Liability Inflows and Outflows. I usually don't include accounts payable transactions because I just don't keep track of them in PCMARS. Accounts payable is an example of something I just take inventory of at the end of the year, and then I can put that in my spreadsheet or with my consultant. That brings me to Excel for a minute. There's this neat spreadsheet that you can export from PCMARS by going to Utility and Export Totals. It will show the account codes on the left, a description, the total balance for the year. So for example, it says $22,500 in machinery and equipment. And we don't really know if this was a purchase for $22,500 or there may have been a purchase for $25,000 and a sale for $2,500. So this is a total, not much detail, but still pretty useful. So for assets, which are the account codes in the 100s, it shows year totals and beginning and ending balances to the right. And like I said, the total is a balance that includes dollars in and dollars out. For liabilities that are the account codes in the 200s, it's the same thing, the yearly total and beginning and ending balances. And for income and expense accounts, which are the account codes in the 300s and 400s, it shows the annual totals and with unit or weight totals. So for example, here I can see that I sold 60,154.39 bushels of old corn, and that the fed cattle I sold weighted 6,300 pounds total. So that's nice. The export window gives you the option of showing yearly or monthly totals, including non-cash items, unit and weight totals, and include or exclude asset and liability balances. So finally, we're now going to see how to create a report that helps us file the 1099s at the end of the year, like we did with QuickBooks. For this, the first thing I need is to make sure I have my vendor set up as a 1099 vendor. For this, I'll go to the vendor information screen, the yellow one at the top, that one. And that will open a screen like this one, where I can see a list of my vendors to the left, and to the right, I have each vendor's detailed information. This vendor is a 1099 vendor as shown on the checkbox to the right. And here's also where I can have, their address entered and all of that. So once I have that right, then I can go to the other reports option in this drop-down menu. And there are a couple vendor reports. One is a summary and the other one is a detailed report. Oh, and the yellow vendor list can also be accessed from here. Well, if you choose the summary vendor report, you can pick a range of dates and whether you want to make it general or 1099 only. And that will give you a summary of how much you've paid them so far in the year. The detail report has each transaction. So if you need that level of information, then you can use that. But at the end of the year, you usually don't need that much detail. So that's it. In this section, we looked at the most important reports that PCMARS offers: the check register report, the detail report, the year-to-date cash summary report, the year-to-date cash flow format report, the multiple enterprise report, the balance sheet, the bank and loan balance report, the export totals, Excel, and the vendor summary to help with filing 1099s. Oh, yes, feedback survey. You have the link in the registration email. If you could fill that in with feedback, complaints, anything, I would really appreciate it. And we are scheduled to meet again, I believe, on Thursday of next week. And we are supposed to look at, oh yeah, the farm records book. Okay, let me see if that's Thursday. No, Wednesday of next week at 1. And we'll go through the farm records book. I am so sorry I went over time. I didn't realize. Thank you for sticking with me. Are there any questions? Okay, again, sorry I took 15 extra minutes of your time today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I'll send you the follow-up email with the recording and the PowerPoint and all of that later. Okay, no more questions? Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Take care.